Hello and welcome. My name is Clare Finburgh. I'm from the School of Arts at the University of Kent. And today I'm going to ask the question, why watch war in the theatre? What can the theatre tell us about the ways we usually watch war, and also the ways that the dominant media or the military or states encourage us to watch war? In wars and in conflicts, fighters and weapons are mobilised, but so are words and images mobilised. The struggle for material and territorial dominance is accompanied by what the visual theorist, the French visual theorist Marie-José Monzin, calls the war of images. Now, just to give an example, the so-called Islamic State, or ISIL, adhere to a fundamentalist version of Islam which censors, which proscribes images and icons and statues. And for this reason, in 2015, ISIL destroyed ancient Roman artifacts and remains in the Syrian city of Palmyra. Now, there was a paradox in this act, in that on the one hand we could say that it was iconoclastic because they smashed icons, they smashed statues, and on the other hand we could argue that it was a form of iconophilia, a love of icons, because the spectacle of destruction that ISIL managed became an iconic symbol of their dark power and of their dominance. Propagandist images of war have probably existed as long as war has existed. The earliest visual representations of war can be traced back to Mesopotamia in the 6th century BCE. But the power of words and images to promote war has accelerated enormously in the past few decades, and this is owing to huge technological advances in audiovisual media. The media coverage of 9/11, the 2001 attacks on New York and on Washington, was some of the most spectacular and mass spectated and spectacularized images in the history of the world. The footage of the planes flying into the Twin Towers and the then images of the accused, the suspect at the time, Osama bin Laden, whether in caves in Afghanistan or else in military camps, and then the images of the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and then more recently spectacles or images of mass migration across the Mediterranean, of people fleeing these various conflicts, have become some of the most abiding images of the 21st century. These dramatic and these arresting spectacles are disseminated by states and also by anti-state groups alike in order to win hearts and minds or to terrorise populations. And we have to admit that these images, these spectacles, are also manufactured by the dominant media in order to sell advertising space online or on the radio or in newspapers. So sensationalised and slick and often oversimplified spectacles have become part and parcel of modern conflict. Now, this use of theatricalised spectacle by parties who wage war and also by parties who manage perceptions of war is of course of great concern to theatre makers themselves. Theatre selects and it frames and it stages people and events from life in order to make sense of them and also in order to affect audiences. Now, so too do political discourses, and so too do the media select and frame events from real life in order to affect audiences. So how do theatre makers react to this mass weaponisation, we could say, of theatre's own theatrical properties? This question has been taken up by a number of theatre makers in the past couple of decades, or certainly in the 21st century. And I'm going to provide a few examples. My first example is Mark Ravenhill's short play, it's just a 10-minute play from 2008 called Crime and Punishment. And Crime and Punishment was part of a bigger cycle of plays by Mark Ravenhill called Shoot, Get Treasure, Repeat. Now, in this play, Mark Ravenhill evokes an iconic televisual moment from the first days of the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. In the play, a woman describes how she and other Iraqis were herded into a square where a statue of the then deposed dictator Saddam Hussein was being pulled down. And she describes how them being herded into the square coincided with primetime TV in the United States of America, so that global audiences could see how supposedly the Iraqi public, the Iraqi people, were behind, they were backing this US-led invasion of their country. So Ravenhill's play reveals the stage management, the mise en scène, these theatrical devices that are co-opted by the military and by states and by the media in times of war. A second example is provided by George Brandt's play of 2012, Grounded. Now this premiered at the Edinburgh Festival and then transferred to the Gate Theatre in London, and there was also a staging off-Broadway with the Hollywood star Anne Hathaway. The play features a female fighter pilot who is literally grounded, this explaining the name of the play. She is downgraded from a fighter pilot to a drone operator in the Nevada desert. Drone warfare is warfare that's fought at a distance with precision-guided weapons, and it's often for this reason called a virtual warfare. The military and governments use digitised screen images of drone strikes to portray drone warfare as clean or as smart warfare. But in Grounded, in this play, these artificial and theatricalised and virtualised images of drone strikes that conceal the real destruction of war are somehow blown apart. The pilot reveals, and she grieves for the civilians, notably a little girl, that she is responsible for having killed as a remote drone pilot. So these plays that I've just mentioned discuss and comment on the weaponisation of theatricality in war. In this respect, they're not necessarily different from a novel or a film or a TV programme that can also debate and discuss the use of spin and image and rhetoric to promote war. So how can theatre offer a unique way of exposing the theatricalisation of words and images in times of war? Now, we need to remember that theatre is made up of bodies and voices. It's made up of objects that occupy the same time and the same space as the audience. And in this way, of course, it differs from non-live forms like the novel or like much visual art and like cinema. So theatre has the capacity to expose in real time, in front of a live audience, precisely how theatrical components are melded into slick images and slick discourses. So an example that I'd like to provide now of these processes of image production and how they are revealed and exposed is provided by the Argentinian director Lola Arias and her 2016 show Minefield. Minefield is unique in numerous ways, but not least because Lola Arias devised it with 6 veterans from the Guerra de las Malvinas, or the Falklands Conflict of 1982. Now, just to remind you, this 74-day conflict was over some British-held islands off the Argentinian coast. And it claimed the lives of over 600 Argentinian troops and over 200 British troops. And it also left the islands littered in over 100 minefields. And this is one explanation for the title of Lola Arias's show, Minefield. So these 6 war veterans from the Guerra de las Malvinas, or the Falklands Conflict, devised the show, and they also performed it. 3 of them were Argentinian and 3 British, one of them was a Gurkha. And I'm going to give an example of one particular scene that showed how official theatricalised spectacles of war projected by states and by the military during a war was somehow dismantled by the play. One of the ex-soldiers put on a frilly blouse and a royal blue jacket and skirt, and he posed, or he dressed up as the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. Another ex-soldier put on a uniform with brass buttons and fringed epaulettes, and he posed as the then Argentinian dictator, General Galtieri. Now, on a large screen behind these two performers, the audience saw and they heard the two figureheads, each sat in front of their respective national flags and each thumping out their sabre-rattling speeches, their rhetoric. Now, in front of this screen on the stage, the audience saw two ex-servicemen performers in ill-fitting costumes with rubber head masks, one of them Maggie Thatcher, the other one Galtieri. And on one of them we could see his hairy legs through his laddered stockings, the one who was playing Maggie Thatcher. We saw them both lip-syncing the speeches of these two heads of state to the camera. So Lola Arias's minefield laid bare the ways in which theatrical narrative is constructed out of decor and props and rhetorical lines. And it also showed how political narrative is constructed out of decor and props and rhetoric. And equally, it showed how the high-definition images on the news that surround us on screens every day are also a form of theatricalised rhetoric. In an article that was written just after 9/11, the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard wrote, with no little controversy, it caused quite a lot of controversy at the time, he wrote the following words. He said, "The spectacle of terrorism forces the terrorism of spectacle upon us." So when sensationalised images, like the spectacles of warmongering that are produced by states and the media on both sides during a conflict like the Falklands Conflict or conflicts today, when these sensationalised images try to impress their ideologies on us, they become, for Baudrillard, terroristic. Now, this is in no way to deny the shocking violence of actual acts of physical terror and of acts of war. Instead, I think what Baudrillard is suggesting is that images and words that are frequently used to represent war not only report on violence, but they perform a kind of violence by being coercive, by trying to tell us what to think, by trying to tell us how to watch. So in response to this, a number of contemporary theatre makers, like the ones that I've just mentioned, consciously try to show the audience that narratives, whether they're narratives in theatre, or else political narratives, political speeches, or else the news, they are artificial constructs. And since theatre is potentially made up of so many artificial elements, like makeup and hair, costumes, video, sound, music, lighting, objects, props, decor, there's all the more potential for theatre to highlight how all narrative is an apparatus of appearances. So theatre, therefore, can challenge official slogans and official spectacles as they're projected by states and the military and the media during wars. Theatre can dismantle these slogans and these spectacles into their constituent theatrical components. So finally, theatre can make way for more oppositional and reflective moments of critique and debate. Thank you for listening.